My name is Terry Wallace. I grew up in Hicksville, Long Island. My father was a military man, spent over 20 years, first in the Army Signal Corps, then the Army Air Corps in communications, and then in the NATO missile program. And I came back to Long Island when I was 17 years old and attended Hicksville High School. I enlisted in the Marine Corps because I was going to go into the Naval Academy to play lacrosse. And the coach at the Naval Academy asked me to go to a prep school for a couple of years, 1 or 2 years, and I decided that I would rather go on active duty, so I enrolled in the Marine Corps, went to Parris Island the day after I graduated from high school, and I arrived at Parris Island on June 30th, 1966. And the last day in November of 1966, I arrived in Vietnam in the 1st Recon Battalion, which is a Special Forces branch of the Marine Corps. As a member of the 1st Recon Battalion, initially I was a machine gunner and then went on to become a squad leader. I was in Vietnam for about 2 months, the first time I was wounded, and I was in a hospital for a few days. I got back out of the hospital. I went back to active duty with my patrol, going out on these long-range recon patrols in Laos and Cambodia, places like that. Our job basically was to seek the enemy, destroy it if we could do that, and get back to our base camp. Eventually I got wounded 2 more times, and I spent some time in some hospitals in off the coast of Vietnam on the USS Repose, and then went to a hospital, an Army hospital in Japan, and eventually ended up in Okinawa. I got back to the United States that Christmas, so all told in country I probably was there for 6.5 months. Probably spent more time in hospitals. When I first came back from Vietnam, I had a girlfriend whose father was in the Marine Corps, and he was in Iwo Jima. And the first thing he did for me, did 2 major things for me. The first thing is he took me to the VFW and made me get a life membership. It was very inexpensive that time. I think it was maybe $90 for a lifetime membership. And the second thing he did is he took me to the Veterans Administration on 7th Avenue, and he told me that if I didn't, go and file some kind of paperwork, I would never get any disability. And he was old enough to tell me that, look, eventually down the line, you might not feel bad today, but eventually, some of these injuries are going to creep up on you. Like I had very bad hand injuries and head injuries and things like that. And so I was very grateful to do that. And as a result of that, I got a 50% disability. Not that I was looking for that, but I'm glad I did it, because over the time, like now my hearing is shot, and at least I can go to the VA and do something about it, or, thank God I have the money that I can go to I have my own medical plans, but there are a lot of guys that don't have that, and that's one of the greatest things about our country. In as much as we hear of all this negative stuff about the Veterans Administration, it's a lot better than there are other places. We really take care of our veterans. As far as my life after, what I did as a result of being in the service, I was only really at a little more than 2 years. I was out of the Marine Corps, primarily because of my injuries, but also because I had a shorter enlistment, and that's probably the reason I went to Vietnam so soon. I joined really July 1st, and I was there the end of November, so I only had very limited training, but I did very good with my test scores as far as map reading and compass reading and the ability to call in like fixed air and artillery, things like that. Went back to college, went to Nassau Community College first, and played lacrosse there, and eventually got a full scholarship to Adelphi University, where I was a two-time All-American. I'm currently an art dealer in the same location in East Hampton for the last 25 years. I specialize in American paintings, 1870 to 1940. I like to do catalogs, and I like to do a lot of academic work, books, things like of that nature, museum shows, to try to champion lesser-known artists, particularly women artists of Long Island, who maybe didn't get very much recognition during their lifetime. A lady saw my Marine Corps flags outside, and she stopped by and she said to me, I have a painting that I'd like to give somebody who was in the Marine Corps. And she said, it belonged to my husband. He's not here any longer. And she said, were you in the Marine Corps? And I said, yes. And she gave me this painting. And recently I just had it framed. It's just a great painting. And it's basically it, the Marine Corps flag, the dress blues hat, and a sword. My family life, I would say that, like a lot of veterans, when I first came home, I did have a lot of psychological problems. I drank a lot. I haven't had a drink in 37 years, but became a very, raging alcoholic. Was not very good with relationships. I was, married a few times. And so I think and I'm not blaming this being in a combat zone, but I think that, I was 18 years old, 19 years old when I got 20 when I was out of the service. I think that it had a little adverse effect on my ability to deal with relationships, mainly because I think that when I was younger, I was really forced to deal with death before I was to deal with life. And so I think I just took things a little too light in the beginning. I think at the age I was in a very small group. There were only 16 guys in my company. I would kind of liken it to being on a close-knit sports team. It was a lot of camaraderie. There was some bad times, but there definitely was a lot of good times. And even though I lost some of my closest friends, it's something you just get used to, and something that, today I still think of these guys almost like they're still here. I don't really think of them as being, I know they're gone, but I don't really think of it that way. In terms of combat, I was young enough to where if I was older like the guys today where they're getting deployed a lot of times, I think it's very unfair. I think, to be in a combat zone, you should be 21 years or younger. I don't think you should be any older than that. Because I think when you start to get a little older, you start looking over your shoulder. And in combat, it can't be that way. You have to be serious about what you're doing and very focused. And also, you can't be afraid. When I was in the Marine Corps, we basically had a thing, shoot first and ask questions later. We didn't have all the political stuff the guys have today. I used to own a candy store across the street, and I have tattoos of the Marine Corps on my arm. And when I had the candy store, I had a young man come in one day, and he wanted to know what my tattoos were. And I told him, they're Marine Corps tattoos. And he told me, tell him something about the Marine Corps. And I talked to him about it, befriended him. Then on Halloween, maybe next year later, he came in and his mom had made him a pair of dress blues for a uniform, for a costume. And I thought he looked great in it. by then I talked to him a lot about being in the Marine Corps, what it was like as far as the brotherhood, what it was like in terms of teamwork. And I was over here one day, and a young man came to see me, and it was Jordan Herder, who was a young man who was killed in combat. And he came over and he said to me, I want to know how do you think I look in my uniform? And I said to him, you know, you look great. Where you're going, it's going to be very dangerous. And the kid said to me, I know that, but this is a lifelong dream of mine. I would give up my life for something I really believe in. And that was the last time I saw young Jordan, and he eventually was killed. But what I think about it is that, just like I think of a lot of my friends, that freedom isn't free. You know, veterans pay a big price for it. And whether it's young Jordan or it's the young guys that I was in with, or the young guys today, I think that it's, especially in the Marine Corps, you put that uniform on, and the reason you're doing it is because you really have a commitment to doing something for your country and for your fellow Marines. So I think for me it was a very positive experience, and I'm very involved, not so much in the Marine Corps, but I always keep an American flag and a Marine Corps flag outside my office. And for me, even though it was in the Marine Corps only a short while, it's really gave me a tremendous amount. When I see these young guys, sometimes I'll be in a restaurant and I'll see a guy in a uniform and I'll buy him lunch, I'll buy him dinner. Not so much for any other reason, but just to let them know that I'm grateful, and that it is good when your country says thank you or recognizes that you've made some kind of sacrifice for it.